Music theory with Microsoft Excel. Mirror inverse intervals for the major modes, that being the Ionian mode, the major scale, the Lydian mode, and the Mixolydian mode. Get ready and some coffee because you ain't never seen rockin' unless you excel at rocking, for which you require Microsoft Excel for the Excel part. We are in Excel. If you don't have access to this workbook, that's okay because we basically built this from a blank worksheet but started in a prior presentation. So if you want to build this entire worksheet from a blank sheet, you could begin back there or just start constructing the part of the table that we're currently working on. If you do have access to this workbook though, 4 tabs down below. Fretboard, example, practice, blank, the fretboard tab having a simulated fretboard, which we will refer back to. The example tab has the finished product, in essence, the answer key. The practice tab has pre-formatted cells, so you can practice the practice problem with less Excel formatting. But if you don't have any of that, that's okay because we'll be working on the blank tab where we started from a blank worksheet and we'll be continuing in the blank part, or at least less formatted part of the worksheet this time, practicing both our Excel skills and music theory skills at the same time. Let's go to the fretboard tab to remember, what are we doing here? We're looking at distances, at ranges, at intervals, noting that the interval names are one of the key conditions, the key points where the language will often force us out of the optimal way to be visualizing the fretboard, that being the fretboard as a map of the territory, like the globe, which has 7 continents, 7 land masses on it. It also has 5 non-continent, non-land masses, non-destination locations, which we are going to call the oceans, which we go through to get to the continents. When we take our perspective from space over the fretboard, for which this is the low or heavy E string, the one closest to the ceiling, we can see the globe rotating around. It's shifting around. The continents are all moving. They're all moving in unison as the world turns. And we're going to give it 12 scale degrees, which we name by the note names 1 through 12, typically working on the 4th scale degree, which we're going to be calling the major key. But we could go to the 5th scale degree, or C sharp, and the whole thing would just shift to the right. Therefore, once we've determined the point or scale degree, the 1 through 12 perspectives that we are looking at, we then want to name the continents by the continent names, which are not the note names, but could be the Nashville number system, 1 through 7, which is basically equivalent to the modes: Ionian, Lydian, Phrygian, Locrian, Dorian, and so on and so forth. Now that's great. I think it's uncontroversial that that's the way to visualize the fretboard to maximize your ability to maneuver around it. But the naming conventions we use throw us off, including the scale degree that is implied when using our distance notations, such as this note from this note being a, what I would call, 2-note away major second. The fact that it says second in it implies that we are imposing a scale on this measuring system. But I might not want to do that because I might just try to be measuring a distance from here to here or from here to here. That would be 4 notes away. But typically people don't say it's 4 notes away. They say it's going to be a major third. The problem with the major third is it implies that we're in a scale degree format. We've made a scale out of it instead of just measuring from this point to this point. And not only that, but we made this the 1 of the scale. So we would like to be able to recognize that at the least and possibly think about other terminology that would be more specific to distance measurement, which doesn't force us into a scale degree thought process when we don't want to be in a scale degree thought process. All right. So, by the way you can normally do that is you could say, well, I could just use notes. It's 4 notes away. That's the thing that should tell you the flavor if I play those 2 notes at the same time or one after the other. You're going to say, no, the flavor is it's a major third. What makes it a major third? Because it's 4 notes away. That's the distance is the thing, not the name of a major third. It has nothing to do with being in a scale degree. It has to do with the distance between these two particular notes, not regarding any other thing involved if those are the only two notes involved. So again, the scale degree kind of messes up our perception to some degree that we at least want to recognize. Now, if I go to the example tab, remember that you can think about this idea of distance. This is going to be what I would call position number 1 on the fretboard. We just took our map of the world, mapped it out here. So we have the North America, the ocean, Europe, Asia, ocean, South America, ocean, Africa, Australia, ocean, getting to Antarctica. It's even easier when we think about it in a circle as we do here. So now we're going to put these in a circle, 1 through 7 continents. And then some of those continents, we have to go through an ocean to get from one to the other. But there's a few continents that are kind of linked together. So we don't need the ocean. This is our analogy. And also, we're thinking there's only one directionality. I can go around in a circle clockwise. And now we're introducing the idea that we can go around the circle counterclockwise. So that's what we're looking at this point in time. We've been thinking about distance just going clockwise, and we can count up by the continents. So if I went from 1 to 4, I would say that's 1, 2, 3 modal half steps up instead of a scale degree of 1, 2, 3, 4, right? Because I might be going from 2 to 5. And I don't need to make it a scale degree. It's just a distance of 1, 2, 3 continents up. Or it's a distance, including the oceans, of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, which would be the equivalent to the note distance. But if I want to get to this 5 from the 2, a 2, 5 modal range, I can also go around the other way. So I could go negative 1, 2, 3, 4 backwards, or negative 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 backwards from a note perspective. That's how it should work. If I'm taking steps around the block going one way, then I should be able to take the number of steps in the block, 12 notes or 7 continents, 7 locations, and be able to subtract that and goes to the same point around the block the other way. It doesn't work that way under the current system because the scale degree is naming a scale degree, which means if I go backwards 1 step, you would think that would be a negative 2nd scale degree. And going forward would be the 2nd scale degree because you're started on the 1st scale degree. But that doesn't make sense because if I say it's the negative 2nd scale degree, first of all, no one says that. And second of all, even if you tried to introduce that term, it doesn't quite make sense because you would think 7 minus 2 would be the distance going around the other way. It doesn't work because you started on a scale degree instead of just measuring the distance. It should be 1 modal half step and then negative 1 modal half step, and then everything works. All right, so we at least need to recognize that problem, and I'm going to introduce an idea of a different naming convention, which I think is what normally would come about if you started from scratch today. But even if you don't use that, we at least want to be able to utilize our current naming convention in such a way that it doesn't mess us up from learning the fretboard. All right. So we did last time, we talked about the normal conventions for measuring the distances. So we've got our notes on the right. We've got our 7 notes that are going to be our continents, equivalent to the continents, which we always are working in the collection of notes related to the key of C, those notes and all the 7 modes related to them. But all the related positions are the same for any other key, all 12 of them, in all 7 positions within all 12 keys, 7 times 12, right? And so we have a distance in half steps, which if I only go forward and I only go within 1 octave, we'll talk about more octaves later, that means I have, 11 different distances that I can name. And we gave names to them. And these are the normal naming conventions, which are just based on the major scale, which isn't optimal because I would like to know the differences from each of the points. And I would like to be dependent not on the name to tell me the flavor, but to know the flavor by the distance. The distance should tell me the flavor. So that's going to be the idea. And then we also saw, though, that I could go backwards, introducing the idea that when we go backwards, I should have a name for that. Now, under the current system, we don't really call a negative scale degree. Instead, I would use the same name. So if I go one step back, I would call that still a major 7. So that means that a major 7, I would recommend you think of it as either you're going forward 11 or you go around the block the other way, -1, so that you can get an idea in your mind that that really represents kind of what we're doing with a modal range concept. So because the major 7 that way always gets you to the same point. Either you go forward 11 if you think of it as a circle, or you can go back 1 and you get to the same point. So that's what I would introduce, but those terms are still not as good as if we actually fixed the terms to be talking about basically actual steps under the proper location, which I would use something like if I went back 1, -1 half step back from the Ionian mode, which would be 1 continent half step back. Now this concept, I'm going to continue on with the other majors. So let's continue that idea. I'm going to hide. I'm going to go over here to the next major, which is going to be the Lydian. So I'm going to hide these. I'm going to go from V to AA, right click and hide those. And let's work in this area. So I'm going to make that, let's make it yellow for now. All right. So that's where we're going to be working. All right. So we're going to say, what if I go from YY, I'm on YY here. Let's do it from down here, this YY. And if I go back 1, instead of going forwards, I'm going to go backwards. Then I can go 1 step back, which would get us from the Lydian to the Phrygian. So if I go 1 step back, I'm going to land on a continent. So what am I going to call that? I'm going to call that then a YP. So I'm still going to call it a YP modal range because that means I can go from the Lydian up to the Phrygian, or I can go from the Lydian back to the Phrygian. So from a Nashville number system, I'm going to call that a 4-3 modal range. So I can go to the 4-3, just like I'm recommending here with this terminology. I can do it by going from the 4 point to up through to get to 3, or I can go back to get to the 3. So then I'm going to say, okay, what's the distance? I'm going to say it's a -1 note from the Lydian mode. Let me do this so it doesn't give me an error. -1 from the Lydian node, which is going to be 1 modal half step backwards, right? So if I go 1, and that makes sense because the other way around the block, if I went forward, would be 11 minus 1. 11 minus 1 would be an 11 node away, Lydian, and then there's 7 modal half steps. So 1 back, 7 minus 1 would be 6 forward. So that makes sense. And so you would think that the first modal half step would be the second scale degree backwards. But we don't really name the second scale degree. So under the normal naming convention, I would recommend that you add the half steps if you're going to use this convention and still say, well, it's a -1 major, still calling it the 7th instead of the -7 second scale degree. And so that's what I would recommend if you want to use these terms, but this would be more proper, really. Okay, so now let's say we're going to go 2 back. So now let's say we're on the Y down here, and if I go to the next one up, we're going to go 1, 2, 3. So it takes 3 notes to go from the Y to the D, and so we're going Y up to the D, which is going to be 2 half steps, modal half steps backwards. So what am I going to call that? I'm going to say that's going to go -3, -3 notes. We're going to call that a YD. So YD could go from the Lydian forward to the Dorian or Lydian backwards to the Dorian. From a Nashville number system, I'm going to say that that's going from the 4 to the 2. And so then I'm going to say that what's going to be the distance? Well, it's a -3. So I'm going to do this first so it doesn't mess me up. -3 from the Lydian mode. And then it's going to be the second modal half step, which you would think would be the 3rd scale degree. So if we use the scale degree terminology, you would think it'd be the 3rd here, but we're not going to use that. Nobody usually says that. So instead, if you use this terminology, I would still call it a -3 major 6, right? So it's a -3 major 6. Again, no one calls it a -3 major 6. They just will call it a major 6. But you want to recognize that the major 6 could be going forward or backwards. Now, if I looked at it going the other way, if I took 12 minus 3, so that would be 9, and 7 minus 2 would be 5. So it would be a 9 node away Y5. That would also be the YD modal range, right? YD modal range is the same, so I can go forward around the block or backwards around the block, and this makes sense. This doesn't. Over here, it doesn't. It makes sense note-wise if you say the half steps, but the major 6 doesn't make any sense, right? You'd have to take like 9 minus the 6 to get it, and the 9 is arbitrary, so it's all kind of wonky because it's all off. It's not the best way to represent it, but that's what is currently in place. All right, let's go to the Y and then the one after the D. So if I'm on this Y and I go 1, 2, 3, I would get to the Ionian. If I'm on the Y, how many steps up is that? If I'm on the Y, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5 steps up. So it'd be -5 steps. So if I go to the -5 steps, I get to the continent. That would be a Y. Whoops, -5 steps. Let me do that again. Something funny happened. Why is it doing it down there? That's weird. All right, I've restarted it now. So we're going to say this is going to be a YI. And that's going to be a distance of a 4 from the Nashville number system to a 1, a 4, 1. Noting that I could go 4, 5, 6, 7, and then 1, or 4, 3, 2, 1, right? Forwards or backwards. And I'm going to say the distance is, I'm going to hit this first, -5 from the Lydian node, which is going to be a third modal half step backwards, which would be equivalent to the 4th scale degree. But the normal naming convention doesn't have scale degrees going backwards, so we would still call it a -5 and then a perfect 5th. Why is it a perfect 5th? Because we just have to know that 12 minus 5 is 7, and 7 is a perfect 5th. So a perfect 5th could be 7 forward or 5 backwards, right? But this would make more sense because here you can see it's going to be 7 forward, 5 backwards, and it's 3 modal half steps backwards. I'm not going to put 2 negatives, right? There's 3 modal half steps backwards. 7 minus 3 would be 4 forwards. So you would think this would be a 7Y4. So see, these two are easy to see that you can go one way around one way and the other way around the other way, and it makes sense. All right. Next, we're going to go and say, what if I go to the one after the I? So if I was on the Y down here and I go 1, 2, 3, 4, it would take me to the N, 4th modal half step up from the Y. So if I start on the Y down here, how many half steps is that? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 6 half steps up. So that's going to be 6 half steps up. That's a weird distance. And again, it's the distance that should tell me, oh, that's the weird one. That's the weird one. Why? Not because it's a flat 5 or whatever. It's because it's 6 notes away. It's the distance, right? And so I'm going to say it's a YN modal range from a Nashville number 6 system, a 4-7 modal range. So what's the distance? It's going to be 6 notes away. Ooh, that's going to be the tensiony sound. And I'm going to say from the Y node, which would be the 4th modal half step, which would be the 5th scale degree. And that's where you get that funny augmented 5th for the Lydian, which is different than in the Ionian. So normally, what would we call that? It would either be a diminished 5 or an augmented 4th, which again, you just would have to know under the normal naming convention. If I go back 6, then 12 minus 6 is also 6, and that's normally going to be a flat 5 or an augmented 4th, right? We just have to know that. But over here, it makes sense because I can see that this one is actually in the key of the Lydian. This should be a negative. It's in the key of the Lydian, and 6 minus 6 would be 6, and 4 minus 6 would be 2, 4 minus 6, 4, 5, 6, 7 would be 3, right? So we'd say, okay, then it would be a 3 note away. Hold on, right here. A 6 note away, Y3 would be the other side of it. Okay, so then let's do the next one. What if I go from the Y to the one above the N? So I go from here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Then we would get to the A. So it's the fifth modal half step backwards. How many notes is that? Okay, if I go from the Y, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So it'd be the eighth half steps. So 8 half steps is going to be here backwards. And we're going to say that's going to be a range of a modal range of a YA or Nashville number. 4 is the Y Lydian to an A or Aeolian, which is the sixth. And we're going to say this is first, negative. We're going back 8 half steps from the Lydian node, the Y node, which would be the fifth or negative fifth modal half step backwards, right? Which you would think would be the sixth scale degree under the normal naming convention, but we don't use the sixth scale degree. So what would we have to do in the normal? We'd have to say, well, 12 minus 8 would be 4, and 4 notes forward is usually a minor third. So a minor third, major third. So a major third could be 4 forward or 8 backwards. Here we could say it's still 4 forwards or 8 backwards, but I'm going to say it would be 5 modal half steps backwards, which would be 7 minus 5 or 2 modal half steps forward. So it'd be a 4 note away Y2. So that, again, under both measurements, this makes sense. It actually works. It's a sound theory. Not because it's music related. It's a sound theory because it's actually sound. This isn't sound. This is a sound theory, but not because it's music. It's because it makes sense. So then let's go to the next one up after the A. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. It's 6 modal half step up to get to the X. Let's do it from here. Half steps, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 10, negative 10. So negative 10 would be in another continent. So we'd go from Y then to X, Y to X, which have a modal range of a 4, 5. The Y is the 4, the 5 is the X. And then we're going to say that's going to be a distance of a negative 10 note away from the Y, which you would think would be the sixth modal half step, which you would think would be, and it's still a negative 6, by the way, negative 6 modal half steps because I'm carrying this negative through. And so you would think that would be the negative 7th scale degree, but we don't use negative 7th scale degrees. Instead, you'd have to know that if you go 10 notes back, that would be equivalent to 12 minus 10 or 2 notes forward, and 2 notes forward happens to be the major second term. So major second could mean 10 notes back or 2 note forward. Here, we could say a 10 notes back is 2 notes forward, and 6 note back would mean that you can also get to the same spot by going 7 minus 6 or 1 forward. So it would be a 2Y1, 2 note away Lydian first modal half step. All right, let's add the ones in the middle. This one is in the middle, so I'm going to call it a YP negative, noting that we could have called it a YD plus. So we have this problem of the ranges being in the middle, which the numbers are better to deal with because from a Nashville number system, it would be going from the 4 to a 2.5, meaning it would be just under or 0.5 under the last range or the 2 plus 0.5 going up this way. And that would then give us the distance of a negative 2 note away. Let's do this first, negative 2, and then it would be a Y, and then it would be a negative 1.5. I'm not going to put another negative because the negative is flowing through all the way through here. So in other words, if I go on the Y and I go 2 nodes up from this not Y, 2 nodes up lands us in the ocean. So let's go right above this one this time. So this time I'm going to say now we're going to be on a YD minus. So we're going negative direction after the D. And so the distance then is going to be going from the 4 to a 1.5 because it would be this last point of a 2, the Dorian, but minus 0.5, or from the 1 plus 0.5, and that would then give us, then this is going to be a negative 4, we're going to say Y, and then it's going to be a negative 2.5. I'm not going to put another negative because that negative I'm imagining flows through, so we don't need 2 negatives, and that means that if I go 4 back from the Y, from the Lydian, 1, 2, 3, 4 lands us in the ocean. All right, let's do the next one up. We're going to say this is going to be a y. It's going to be a yn negative. Right after the yn, it's going to be a 4 to a 6.5, because the last point is going to be 7 minus 0.5 or 6 plus 0.5, and this is going to be a negative. We're going to say it's a negative 8, and then y, a negative 8y, and then it's going to be, no, I've got this wrong. That's why it's going to be a negative 7y 4.5. So in other words, if I go negative 7, which is normally a good one, because that would be a perfect, would be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, lands you in the ocean. That's ocean. That's a weird one. So now we're going to say this is going to be a ya negative. This is going to go from the 4 to the 4.5, which would be 6 minus 0.5 or 5 minus 0.5 up top. This is going to be a negative. We're going to say it's a 9y and then 5.5. So if I go 9 up from the Lydian, so we go here 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. We land in the ocean. Let's do the last one, which is, we're going to call it a yx negative, which is going to go from 4 to 4.5, which we're going to call then a negative 11y 6.5. Negative y 6.5, because if I go from y up 11, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, we once again land in the ocean. All right, let's do the next one. Let's make the next one like orange maybe. Let's work in this area, and we'll make this one orange this time. And we'll do the same thing for the other major mode, which is Mixolydian, and it has the difference to the Ionian, which is happening on the first one we're going to do, 1 step back or 11 step forward, because it has a flat, what we call 7, minor 7. So if we were on the Mixolydian, let's go to this one. We want to go back, and that would take us to the Lydian. So if I go this way, and I'm on, here's the X, how do I get there? Well, it's 2 steps backwards, negative 2. So instead of negative 1, like it is on the Ionian and on the Lydian, this is 2 steps back. So I have to go up here, and this is going to be an XY modal range, or modal range of 5 to 4. So I can go forward around, which would be 5, 6, 7, 1, 2, 3, 4, or backwards, 5 minus 1 would be 4 from a modal half step. From a note perspective, I'm going negative 2 notes back from the Mixolydian, which would be the first modal half step, which you would think would be the second scale degree, but we don't normally do a second scale degree. So from our normal terminology, I would call it a negative 2 minor 7, because a minor 7 usually means that we're going 12 minus 2 or 10 forward, but it can also be, you could say, negative 2 back. That's how you might want to visualize that. All right, so then we're going to go, let's go to the next one. So let's imagine we go from the X to the one after the Y. So now we're on the X, we're going to go 1, 2, 2 modal half steps back to get to the P. So if I was on the X right here, it would be 1, 2, 3 notes back. So if I go here, I'm on the negative 3 notes. So the modal range then is going to be an XP modal range. It's going to be a 5, 3 then for the X and the P. And that's going to be a negative 3 notes back from the Mixolydian mode, which would be the second modal half step, which you would think would be the negative 3rd. It's going to be the negative 2nd modal half step, which you would think would be the negative 3rd scale degree. But we don't have a negative 3rd under the normal conditions. What would I recommend calling it? If you don't want to use this new terminology, I would recommend calling it a negative 3 major 6. Why? Because 12 minus 3 would be 9. So the major 6 either means you go 9 forward or you go 9 forward or 3 backwards is how you might want to visualize that. But you still have problems with, like, the scale degree doesn't quite work and so on and so forth. So I really think this modal range thing is better, but you do what you're going to do, right? So this is the next one up. If I go after the P, so we're going to say if I go from the X to the one after the P, it's going to be 1, 2, 3. So the third modal half step back to get to the D. If I go from the X down here and count that up, it's going to be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 half steps up. So 5 half steps up will be here. So -5 lands us on a continent. For the Mixolydian, I'm going to call that an XD modal range or a 5-2 modal range. The distance is going to be -5x, which would be the negative third. I'm not going to put another negative, but it would be the negative third modal half step back, which you would think would be the negative fourth scale degree. But we don't normally have a negative fourth scale degree. So what you normally have to do is say 12 minus 5, which would be 7. So it would normally be a 7 note away perfect fifth. Would be also, you can also say it's a -5 note away perfect fifth, right? You can go forward 7 or back 5. All right. But this way, of course, makes more sense because this way you can say, well, if I can, either system makes sense, right? You can say, well, 12 minus 5 is 7, and then 7 minus 3 would be 4. So it would be a fourth modal half step, a 7x4. Okay, let's do the next one. So now we're going to go up above the X. So if I go from, or above the D, and we're going to go 1, 2, 3, 4. So -4th modal half step to get to the I. If I'm on the X, how many notes is that to go up to there? It would be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So -7 notes. So we're going to go -7. So -7 is here. So we're going from X to I modal range, which from a natural number system, it's a 5-1 modal range. And that's going to be, we're looking negative distance though. So it's going to be a -7 notes from the Mixolydian node, which would be the negative, but I'm not going to put another negative because I only want one negative in my term here, which is going to be the fourth modal half step, which you would think would be the -5th scale degree. Under the conventional name though, we don't have a -5th scale degree. So what you'd have to do is say, well, if it's 7 backwards, that would then mean that it's going to be 5 forward. 5 forward is typically a perfect fourth. So the perfect fourth could either be going 5 forward or 7 backwards. So, but this would make more sense because you can see the other way around the circle would simply be 12 minus 7 and 6 minus, or 7 minus 4 to go to either term you're looking at if you're going around the block counterclockwise versus clockwise. Okay, so what if we go to the one after the I? So we go to the X down here and the one after the I. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It's going to be the 5th modal half step, so -5th modal half step to get to the N. If I'm on the Mixolydian down here and I want to get to the N, Locrian, negative half steps, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So -8 half steps. So -8 half steps would be here to get us on a continent. We're going to call that an XN. Mixolydian modal range, which is going to be a 5-7 modal range, but we're going backwards. So we're going to say it's a -8 steps back from the Mixolydian, which would be negative. I'm not going to put another negative, but it's a -5th modal half step, which you would think would be the -6th scale degree, but we don't normally use scale degrees. Therefore, you'd have to say, well, 8 minus 12, 12 minus 8 would be 4. So normally we call it a 4 note away major third, but you can also then go the other way and call it an 8 note away major third. So a major third could be 4 forward or 8 backwards, in other words. But this way you can say it's 8 backwards or 4 forwards to get to the same spot. And the 5 is easily converted by saying it's 7 minus 5 to be 2. So 2 forward. So it'd be a 4 note away X Mixolydian second modal half step forward. All right, let's do the next one. So now we're going to say if I go to the one after the N, if I'm on the X and I go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6th, -6th modal half step to get to the A. So if I'm on the X down here and I go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So that would be -10 half steps. So we're on the -10 here. To land in a continent or on a continent, that would be an XA modal range from a Nashville number system, 5-6 modal range. The distance, we're going negative, so we're going to go -10. and it would be from the Mixolydian, which you would think would be the negative, I'm not going to put another negative, but the sixth modal half step, -6 modal half step, which you would think would be the -7th scale degree, but we don't really have, under the normal naming, a -7th scale degree. So instead, we have to say, well, if it's 10 steps back, it would be 2 steps forward, which we normally call a major second. Therefore, a major second could be 2 steps forward, major second, or 10 steps back. That's how I would think of a major second, but I would rather think of it as from the standpoint of the Mixolydian. And by the way, you might be saying, well, what if it's not in context of the Mixolydian? Because maybe I don't know the mode that I'm in. If it's not in context, then you shouldn't have scale degrees or the modal names, right? You should just be using notes. It's 10 notes away. The 10 notes should tell you the feel. It doesn't need, the fact that it's in a scale means you're adding context. And if you're adding context, you would rather do it by modal point, the point, rather than the scale degree. But in any case, it would be 10, it would be a 2 note away Mixolydian first, right? 2 note away X1. All right, let's add the ones in the middle now. So this is going to be an X negative. So we're going to go right after the X, not quite getting to the Y, which is going to be from a modal range, a 5-4.5, which would be this 5 minus 0.5 with a 4 plus 0.5, which would be, I'm on the -1. So we're going to say this is going to be a -1, and this would be a Mixolydian 0.5 or -0.5 scale degrees. In other words, if I go Mixolydian and I go up just one, I get in between the Mixolydian, just one after Mixolydian negative, but I don't quite get to the Lydian. All right, let's go to this one and say this one's going to be what is this one going to be? An XP negative. So that's going to be then a 5 to a 2.5, because it's 3 minus 0.5 or 2 plus 0.5. That's going to be then a -4 x 2.5. So in other words, if I go from Mixolydian up by 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, lands us in the ocean. Let's do this one. This is going to be an XD negative, or in other words, we're going to say this is going from the 5 to the 1.5, because it's 2 minus 1 or 1 plus, or sorry, 2 plus minus 0.5 or 1 plus 0.5. That's going to get us to a negative. We're going to say it's a -6 x and then 3.5, which is a -3.5 modal half step, because the negative is following through. So in other words, if I start on the X and I go up 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, lands us in the ocean. All right, next one, we're going to say this is an XN negative. So we're going XN negative, which is going to be then the what is this? This is going to be a 5-6.5, because it's 7 minus 0.5 or 6 plus 0.5, which is going to be a negative. We're going to say 9x, and it would be a negative, but I'm not putting another negative, 5.5 modal half step backwards, which so that would be that, meaning if you go from the Mixolydian up 9, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, lands you in the ocean just above the Locrian, not quite to the Aeolian. And then finally, we're going to call this an XA negative, which is going to be a 5 to a 5.5 modal range, which is going to be a negative, we'll say 11x, and then 6.5 or -6.5 modal half steps backwards. In other words, if I was on the Mixolydian down here and I go up 11, we go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, or down 11 or -11, then we land in the ocean. So that's going to be the general idea. So again, I know that this terminology, you might not be able to use it all the time, but I think in your own thought process, if you get into the habit of learning this terminology, then it's going to get you out of some bad habits that I think a lot of people get into with this terminology, where they get all mixed up and they kind of give up on counting distance, because again, these distance terms, don't really tell you the negative distance unless you think about it. You have to think about, like, what does this mean? Why is the inverse have a negative distance which isn't taking into account the negative distance? And why do I have to think about a scale degree when I'm just trying to find the distance between 2 points? And why am I using this name of a major third, for example, to tell me the flavor of the sound of the 2 notes played at the same time, when I should just know that by the fact that they have a distance of 4 notes away? That should be the thing that tells me. All those things are, those are problems that are happening simply because of the naming convention, right? You want to know the distance of the notes, and that tells you the flavor, and then tell you which of those flavors are in each of the modes, right? And then it would be best to have a naming convention that just tells you the distance. Anyway, so we'll continue with the minors next time.